Hello, welcome to Management 112C1. This is organizational behavior. We're going to cover chapter 11 and 12. This video is only going to cover chapter 11. This is in an effort to make up for the class that was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I haven't had an awful lot of chance to figure out how to get some of the materials online. The tests will now be online. Every class will be online. We may have real-time classes in the future, but in order to get back onto track, we're just going to release this on YouTube for the time being and cover the material that we need to. I've been working, I think I worked the last 15 consecutive days from home, including weekends, about 12 hours a day. I happen to work for the government in Health and Human Services, so you can probably imagine that we have a lot going on. But I should have the ability to keep going with this class and get you the material that you need so that we can stay on track. This is basically just going to be an overview of the chapter, looking at the PowerPoint. Hopefully going forward, we'll have some interactivity. We can actually hold the class at the right time, whether it be using Zoom or something on Moodle, where you can ask questions in real time. I'm probably going to have to try to use Moodle to deal with questions that may arise, so feel free to submit me emails, or we may have a discussion board set up on Moodle to cover it. But we're just going to do chapter 11 in this video. Chapter 12 will be in a subsequent video, and enjoy. So we're going to cover chapter 11, which is teams, processes, and communications. Slide 3 covers team characteristics. So a team is two more people working independently to achieve a common objective. If you've got just a group of people standing around at a bus stop, for example, you would not call that a team. It could be considered a group because they just happen to be there, but when they are coordinated for a particular purpose, that takes a group and turns it into a team. It's the interactions between the team members and acting towards the common goal that really makes it a team instead of just a random group of people. Slide 4 has a chart that basically breaks down the different types of teams that you may have. Work team, these are things that can last a long time. They may even be indefinite. You could be involved in quality management. You could be involved in sales and constantly updating the procedures necessary to make the sales more effective. The member involvement in such a team is high because they're actually doing the work. Management team is a little bit different. Again, that is a long lifespan. It consists of top management. They typically would meet together to talk about certain objectives. They usually would create projects. A lot of teams are involved in projects. And basically what the goal of a management team would be to do is to take a look at all the strategies, all of the mission statements, goals, and objectives of a group, figure out how the units all work together and coordinate them. A parallel team basically provides recommendations. The lifespan can vary. It could be very short term if you had a very simple problem that you needed to address. Again, quality circles, advisory councils, committees, things that are put together for a very specific purpose. The member involvement is not necessarily very high because they're looking at, rather than doing the work, they're looking at solutions to be able to enable others to do work at a higher level. A project team is very specifically designed to achieve the goals of a particular project. A project is a course of work that is defined, that is a little bit separate than what you would be ordinarily doing in the course of your job. Project team, a project basically has a beginning, a middle, and end, a deliverable that is due at some point. So let's say we work for a bank and we need to buy a new computer system, and not only buy the new computer system, but upgrade the system that's currently in place and train people on how to use it so that people can come to work and relatively seamlessly be able to do their job going forward. An action team is something that, again, it could vary in terms of lifespan and member involvement, but these are things that people are doing as part of their job. If you're in the fire department, you may be working on a squad that goes out to put out a fire. That is an action team. You work together. They could be very stressful. It could be a very immediate situation that needs a direct response. The examples on the slide also include a surgical team, a music group, sports team, people that are tackling a particular objective and working together with a high level of coordination in order to get something done relatively quickly. And it can typically be a rather challenging circumstance. So like I said, the example of a fire department is pretty good. Slide 5 just basically shows you the breakdown of the different types of teams. They are all categorized separately, but they are qualified as teams, and that term is used in this chapter. On slide 6, the various types of teams that you've got. You could have a virtual team. Ironically, that's kind of what we're doing here a little bit. It's the idea of using the internet, telecommuting, Zoom, WebEx, what other types of features that you can use to allow people to work in a dispersed geographic location. The advantage of this is that if you've got quality people that you need to work for you, you don't have to limit yourself to people who are physically present in your office where you're located. So if the best person to be on this team happens to be in New York and another one is in France and the home office is in Boston, you could basically set up a team to run virtually using technology. We have a whole bit about communications and how it may be a little bit difficult to accurately or adequately communicate when you're not face-to-face. Slide 7 talks about the models of team development. They try to make these things rhyme. I don't know how well they do, but forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, which doesn't really fit, but it kind of sounds the same, so they like to use those 5 terms. This is pretty consistent pretty much in any organizational behavior text that you're going to see. Teams should be developing in this predictable sequence where you get together, you try to figure out who's going on, you rush into things to try to figure out where everybody's going to be. Over time, any kind of conflict starts to get worked out. That's in the norming phase. And then you get to the actual job, doing the work that is required of the team. And then when, in the case of a project, for example, when it's finished, then you break the team up and you should go back and take a look at how effective the team was at accomplishing the objectives. Some teams don't work in a linear fashion, meaning simple steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In a perfect world, you would follow all of those steps and everything would take place in a reasonable period of time. But in the real world, oftentimes you think that you're going to have this nice linear, clean process. But as slide number 7 shows, you could have forming and pattern creation where people are trying to figure out what's going on. Inertia simply means that they're stuck trying to figure out what's going on. Then they get to process revision. They may stumble into some more inertia. It's basically a team that doesn't have an awful lot of guidance. It's a team that isn't functioning particularly well. They may end up being productive in the end, but if you're not sticking to the process, you could end up with a lot of sidetracking and some delays. Slide 8 talks about the models for team development. That's what we just covered on the previous slide. When teams do not develop in a nice, linear, straightforward way, it's called punctuated equilibrium, meaning that they're just kind of floating around, stopping and starting. There's a little bit of chaos involved as well. A hallmark of punctuated equilibrium is starting and stopping. You may have bursts of activity where a whole lot of things are accomplished, and you may have periods of inaction because people don't really know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. If you're not careful, they are going to end up in a period or a state of inertia, meaning that they're not accomplishing anything. On slide 9, they talk about team interdependence. So when you pick a team as a manager, it's quite important that you get people with the appropriate skill set. Number one, they should really complement each other. I don't mean complement as in flattering people, but complement with an E instead of an I, where one set of skills matches the gaps in another person's set of skills. So if we're doing a product creation, it's good to have an engineer, but we might want a marketing person in there. We might want a finance person in there. If we just had a group that all had the same background, you're only going to get one viewpoint. So it kind of depends on the team or the project that you're trying to complete. You'll have to pay attention to making sure that you pick people that you can trust on teams, that will work together on teams, and ideally they've been trained to be able to perform well on teams. They understand what the criteria are and what their roles are. So when you have a good, solid team, they're interdependent on each other. So they interact and rely on the other team members. They get information from each other. They're able to accumulate the materials that they need. They're able to get the resources, preferably from management, or they have the means by which to do it themselves. And the team can kind of function as an independent body to a level outside of the normal group of employees that may be involved in a company. Slide 10 shows the couple of diagrams here to explain what task interdependence is. If you're looking at comprehensive interdependence, that means that every member is kind of dependent on someone else. Member 1 has to do with member 4 as well as member 3 and member 2. With all of the cross arrows going around, everybody needs everybody else to be able to do their job. And when they complete their task together, that's the output. Reciprocal independence means that a few people might be dependent on each other. So in this example, member 1 and member 2 need to operate together. Maybe member 2 only needs to talk to member 3 and 4 needs to only talk to 3 as well. So it just kind of depends on who has the knowledge, who has the skill set for that particular task that the group is trying to achieve or that the team is trying to achieve. Sequential interdependence simply means that each member is going to be an expert in its particular step of whatever the project is. So member 1 will do its work, hand it over to member 2, he'll complete his work, hand it over to 3, she'll finish what she's doing, and then eventually you end up with the output. Pooled interdependence is probably the least interdependent version, but the first one, the comprehensive interdependence, really means that the team is functioning together and everybody is sharing. Those are the types of teams that you typically end up with the highest level of productivity. Pooled interdependence simply means that everybody's doing their piece. They're not even really reviewing it with anybody else. It's just going straight to the output. That may work, but again, it depends on the type of task that you're trying to complete. In terms of interdependence for goals, when team members have a shared vision of what they're trying to do, they will align everything that they're doing as an individual and put it forward for the team's outcome. So one of the things that you could do, going on to slide 12, one of the things that you can do to make sure that your team works at the highest level is to ensure that they've been trained on how to be on a team. I often tell my classes that a lot of the courses that I've had to take in the past require me to work on teams, and very frequently they end up being maybe a group of 4 people. It seems like 1 or 2 people do all the work, one person does a little bit, and the other one you can never find. And then the project is due, and then you have to put everything together. Maybe they'll show up the night before the project is due. A lot of the times that happens because either managers, or in this case, the example that I was giving, a classroom, you have a teacher that just says work together on a team and they don't tell anybody how to do it. I had a class when I was getting my MBA, and the teacher basically spent a week or 2 teaching us how to work together on a team. And one of the things that we had to do is make a compact, which is essentially the same as a contract. We sat down and drafted an agreement between the team members, and we basically said, what our strengths were, what our weaknesses were, how we could work together, what our roles were going to be, what our objective was, what the mission was. That was a class, so the objective was to get an A. The information on slide 12 kind of shows you how you can go ahead to develop a mission statement. So the team can meet together, or virtually they can get together. They should have enough time to figure out how to get through everything. You have one team leader, maybe facilitating everything. You make up a draft. At the end of the day, when I was doing this in my class, we ended up signing our names to it. And it's a little bit different than when you just get together with a group of people and say that you're going to work together on a team. When you have something that has your name on it that says that if you're going to email me, I'll respond in 24 hours or less. When I make a commitment in writing that I'm going to do something, plus we've all had training on what it's like to work on a team and team dynamics, that was the best team that I ever worked on. And when teams fail, it's because they don't have any guidance and they don't have any expectations about what they're supposed to be doing or what each team member is going to be doing. So creating a mission statement is a very important process. If this is a team that's together to go out and buy lunch, not such a big deal. But if this is a team that's trying to figure out how to get quality assurance or to institute new software or to purchase a product that nobody's purchased before, this is going to be a bigger deal. It's going to be a longer term event. And it's the type of thing that you probably want to spend the time planning it out. So doing a mission statement and planning out the rest of it is going to be worthwhile for the larger projects. Outcome interdependence, which is on slide 13, it's very quick. It basically just talks about making sure that everybody understands what the goal is going to be and what the outcome is going to be. So if you do a good job, are we going to get a bonus? Are we going to get a raise? Are we going to get, employee of the month or something? Just so that people understand what it is that you're getting for your participation, that provides an incentive to maybe stick to the rules and work together more coherently. So in 14, it's another one of those surveys where you have totally disagree as a 1, totally agree as a 7. And the questions that they're asking are, are my responsibilities of the team, are they all interconnected? Do we need to work together? Do you list whether or not you can be effective as a team unless your other teammates provide information or resources? The average score on this was about 14. So when there's 9 questions and it's a 1 through 7, the highest score would have been something like a 63. So this would typically come out as a rather somewhat disagree. So there's not a lot of interdependence on some of the teams that have been tested using this tool. This lack of interdependence is pretty common, and using the example of schoolwork, that happens quite frequently where people just kind of go off and do what they want, and then you scramble at the end to make sure you get all of your materials together. So if you have a more cohesive team, typically you would have a higher level of interdependence. Moving on now to slide 15, they cover the 5 aspects of team composition, and this involves member roles, member ability, member personality, diversity, and size. So go to slide 16, we're talking about team and individualistic roles. Team task roles, these are things where you're trying to get something done. You could basically assign people on the team to fill these roles, and one person could have multiple roles. So the first one you're looking at is the initiator contributor. This is somebody whose job is to come up with new ideas, come up with ideas that would be able to solve problems that maybe arise. A coordinator is basically kind of an administrator or a manager. They'll list all the things that people have agreed to do or what they've been assigned to do and make sure that they're tracked. The orienter determines the direction of the team's discussion. It's kind of like a facilitator as well. Devil's advocate, I think we might have talked about this before. When you're having a debate, when you're trying to make a decision, it's often you end up with what's known as groupthink. If you get a team that's working together and they're all really cohesive and they want to work together as a team, that's great. But the problem is when you come up with a bad idea, there may be an incentive due to peer pressure not to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is a bad idea. So what the devil's advocate is, the name of it is supposedly from the Catholic Church, where if somebody was being nominated to be a saint, they'd have to vote to see if the person was going to be worthy of being a saint. So everybody would come in and say what was great about them. They would assign someone to be the devil's advocate to argue why they shouldn't be a saint. The idea being, if someone is given leeway to make comments that may be negative, they'd be more willing to do it if that's their job, and everybody expects them to do it. So it's not going to be criticized. It's not going to be viewed as someone who's not being a team player. And the strength that it gives a team is before everybody uses this groupthink where they act all cohesively and march off a cliff together, somebody stops and says, wait a minute, is this really a good idea? By making these types of arguments, it's a lot easier to find the flaws in some of the things that you're doing. And then you can go back to the initiator contributor or the coordinator to try and make sure that the input of the devil's advocate is addressed. And if you're marching off in the wrong direction, having someone in this role could really help save some time. Because the worst thing you can do is dedicate a lot of time and resources doing something that ultimately isn't going to work because nobody questioned it. So you could save some time by avoiding bad decisions ahead of time by having a devil's advocate. The energizers are somebody who's trying to be a cheerleader, get things going. Procedural and technician, there may be certain jobs that you're in, whether it's in IT or law, that there could be a lot of requirements, forms, documents that need to be filed. If there is a bureaucracy within the organization, you come up with a new idea. How does it get approved? Who has to see it? The procedural technician would be the one that would be in charge of making sure that whatever output this group has, it goes to the right parties to be able to take action on it. Team building roles in the middle of slide 16, you've got the encourager, harmonizer, compromiser, gatekeeper, expediter, standard setter, and follower. Just read through the descriptions, they're all pretty straightforward. Individualistic roles, these are oftentimes relatively negative. If you have someone who's really aggressive, they could be demanding of other teammates. They're not necessarily looking out for everybody's best interest. They may be acting selfishly. The blocker may be refusing to consider ideas that weren't his own or her own. Recognition seekers is somebody who's trying to get credit for everybody else's work. Self-confessor, you've probably all have the people that tell you all about what's going on in their private lives, whether it's relevant to the work or not. Slackers is somebody who's maybe not doing the work. They're not picking up the slack where they're supposed to. And a dominator is pretty similar to the aggressor, but they're going to be using manipulation in order to get the teams to do things the way that they want to so that they can take control of the situation. I suppose if you've ever watched Survivor or something, one of those reality TV shows, all the backbiting and conniving going on in the background, that's kind of what a dominator would do because they're trying to manipulate other people to get in a position of authority. So the individualistic roles, these are typically negative. If you can keep up with the team task roles and the team building roles as a focus on what you're doing, those should be your individualistic roles. If you're acting for individual glory, it's going to be detrimental to the team. When you're picking a team, as noted on slide 17, you want to make sure that the people are going to be working together, have the capacity and the ability to do what is needed. Assuming that everybody on the team is capable of doing what is required to get the outcome that you're looking for, this is kind of related to the interdependence tasks that we were talking about before. Disjunctive tasks are the types of duties or roles that people fill where only one member of the group actually needs to be able to complete it, or they have to have the ability to complete it. So if you have a marketing person, they're in charge of the marketing aspect of it, as opposed to the finance person making sure that they have the financial resources to be able to fund whatever it is that the recommendation of the team is going to be. Conjunctive tasks are when each member of the group has to contribute to something. If you have a software development project and you have a team that's working on it, you got a bunch of software designers, they may have the ability to do certain things, but everybody has to be aware. I'm not a coder, but I'm assuming that if you code something the wrong way, you may have some conflicts within an application that you're developing. So even if they're doing slightly different things, the tasks are going to be really dependent upon everybody else, so they have to work together. Additive tasks refers to group work where each member of the group can add something additional to the output. It may be some type of ability that they have that maybe wasn't relevant and they volunteer it up. I happen to be a good editor of materials, so if we're reading something and we're cobbling together a business plan at the end of the day, I could just say, hey, look, I'll read it because I have a background in editing. Personality is important as well. We already talked about, the big 5 personality traits and other issues regarding like agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion. So if you have agreeable people, they're the ones that you probably want to put on a team as opposed to disagreeable people. The nature of a team is that they have to work together. Again, we mentioned the devil's advocate. You don't want them to be so agreeable that they don't ever take a second to say, maybe this isn't the right thing to do. But we're not talking about being naive or gullible. We're just talking about being able to work together without being insulting or having a negative attitude that could diminish the team's capability of working. Conscientious people, we've talked about it before. They're the ones that are going to do their job. They have a high level of self-efficacy. They have good self-esteem. They take pride in their work, and when they're given an assignment, they do it. And if you're on a team and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, that's going to make the team work a lot better. Again, extroverted people tend to perform better, according to some tests. Again, as an introvert, I don't necessarily think it's the biggest thing that you have to deal with. But as long as you can get people, whether they're introverted or extroverted, to act in a manner where they have the interpersonal communication skills to be able to talk to someone and explain what's going on and work together as a team, that's what we're really talking about here. Diversity is important. When you have different ideas, different opinions, we're not necessarily talking about diversity based on background, religion, gender, those types of things. It can be diversity simply in knowledge. Some people have different strengths in different areas, but if you have different ways of viewing things and you have a problem that's really difficult that the team needs to solve, if you have people that think the same way, you're going to get one potential response. If you have people that think a lot of different ways, you're going to bring a lot more material to the table, and you could create a hybrid decision or a hybrid solution to the problem that might not have arisen previously. In terms of classifying the types of diversity that may be present on teams, when people find out that they have a lot in common, the similarity attraction approach simply means that they're going to bond quicker. Surface level diversity is when people appear, at least at first glance, to have things in common. They may feel kind of a kinship where they can act more cohesively quickly. And deep level diversity can actually be where even if people think that they're the same, they may have quite a few distinctions in terms of their personality. These are just different ways to look at diversity. It doesn't necessarily mean that, it's good or bad. It's just a way to look at it. The idea that you have diversity on a team, for the reasons that we already mentioned, is important because you don't want to have limited viewpoints when you're trying to come up with a solution if you have a problem that you're trying to solve. Team size is an important aspect to it. Even if you have 100 people on a team, probably what you'll end up doing is breaking it down into smaller segments. So the best numbers, usually 3, 4, 5, are the best size for a team. If it gets bigger than that, it becomes more difficult to handle. You can't really keep track of what people are doing. You can't really communicate particularly well. It's hard to stay cohesive. So 3 to 5, I think the book probably says 4 to 5. Slide 20 does say 4 to 5. That's usually the size where people say that they have the most satisfaction because it's easier to deal with a team. If you have a much bigger team, if you can break them into cohorts of 4 to 5 and then have them go through a reporting structure, maybe even have like a management team to look into the input from those smaller teams, that works better than just simply trying to communicate to 2 or 3 dozen people. It's very hard to be able to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need and that you can control the situation and make sure they're doing the work that they have to. Team viability, the next slide on slide 21, they're just talking about, this is kind of in the adjourning part where you go back and you check to make sure if the team did a good job. The questions that they ask, has the team accomplished more than what I could have accomplished on my own? That's basically the key question because the whole point of being on a team is to get this synergy, the ability to work together to be able to produce something that you couldn't do on your own. If I wanted to build a house, I could probably do it myself, but if I had people helping me out, lifting a piece of wood or a beam or something that's too big or too heavy for me to do, I'd be able to accomplish a lot more. If you have individuals, you're able to measure their output as individuals, but when you put them together in a team and they work synergistically, they can produce more than any of the 5 individuals could have on their own. Similarly, or contrarily, if you have a poorly managed team, the 5 people working together can actually produce less than they would have on an individual basis. That's why it's so critical to make sure that the teams are trained and designed appropriately to be able to do the work. The other questions, have we done an excellent job? It's basically looking for feedback so that people could determine whether or not it was a good experience. The average score on this was 22. The max would have been about 30. So most of the people who responded to this particular survey did find that the teams that they were working on were pretty good. In terms of whether or not there is a correlation between certain aspects of working on a team and the performance, if you look at the first one on slide 22, they're talking about task interdependence. There is a slight correlation, or at least a moderate correlation, between task interdependence and team performance. That means that the more interconnected all of the members are and dependent upon each other, the better the team performs. There is a weak correlation between task interdependence and team commitment. There just doesn't seem to be that much of a change in how committed the members of the team are to doing the work in terms of task interdependence. Typically, what it leads to team commitment is the ability to work with people that you enjoy being with. You have positive people, it makes it a lot simpler. That's probably more tied to team commitment than the actual task interdependence. That's it for Chapter 11. We're going to split the PowerPoints into 2, and it will be available on another PowerPoint that I'm going to put up shortly.